The first thing I did when the bolt slid shut on the other side of the cellar door was look at my watch. It was 7:42 on the night before Thanksgiving, and I remember thinking very clearly that they had picked a bad night for it. The roads were going to freeze by 10. Whatever they thought was going to happen down here, the weather was going to have an opinion too. My wife grabbed my sleeve. Helen has small hands, and after the stroke 2 years ago, her left one doesn't grip the way it used to. So when I felt both of them close around my forearm, I understood how scared she was. She whispered my name, just my name, twice, the way you say a word when you've forgotten there are any others. It's all right, I told her. Stand still a second. Let your eyes settle. Above us, I could hear them moving around my kitchen. My daughter's voice, high and fast. Her husband's voice, low. The way a man talks when he thinks he's already won and he's just doing the paperwork. A chair scraped. The refrigerator opened and closed. They were making themselves at home in the house I built with my own 2 hands, while my wife and I stood in the dark below them in the cellar I dug out of a Vermont hillside in the spring of 1981. I want to tell this the right way, so I have to go back a little. I'm 74. I spent my whole working life as a cabinet maker and finish carpenter. The last 30 of those years running my own shop out of a barn 40 feet from my back door. I never got rich. Anybody who tells you that you get rich building staircases for other people's houses is selling something. What I got after 40-some years of it was a paid-off house on 11 acres, a savings account I'd fed a little at a time, Social Security, and a body that aches when it's about to rain. That was the whole of my fortune, and to me it was enough. It was more than enough. Helen and I had 1 daughter. I'm not going to pretend that was easy on us, only having the one, because we'd wanted more, and it didn't happen, and so we poured everything into her. Dance lessons we couldn't really afford. Braces. A used Honda when she turned 17 that I rebuilt the transmission on myself in that same barn. College, which we paid for out of money I'd set aside 1 job at a time, so she'd walk out the door owing nobody anything. I'm telling you this not to make her sound spoiled, because she wasn't, not as a girl. She was sweet. She used to sit on a stool in my shop doing her homework and breathing in the sawdust, and she'd ask me what every tool was for. Then she met him. I'm going to call him my son-in-law, because that's what he is in the eyes of the law, though I'd take it back if I could. He's the kind of man who has a firm handshake and a story about how the deal he just closed was win-win for everybody. He sold mortgages, then he sold something he called asset strategy, and by the time he married my daughter 11 years ago, he'd convinced her that the whole point of having parents who owned a piece of land was that someday it would become hers, and the sooner that someday came, the better. It started small. It always does. A few years back, he began saying at every holiday that Helen and I should think about the future, that the house was too big for us, that stairs were dangerous at our age, that all this land was just sitting there, not working for us. He used that phrase a lot, making your money work for you. Like a dollar was a lazy teenager, you had to find a job. He floated the idea of us signing the property over to them, with the understanding, of course, that we'd live there as long as we liked. For tax reasons, he said. For protection from the nursing home, he said. Because, he said, if one of us got sick, the state could come after the house. Helen wanted to believe him. She's a believer by nature. It's one of the reasons I married her. But I'd built things for too many people not to know what a load-bearing lie looks like. So I did what I always did when I wasn't sure about a piece of work. I went and asked somebody who knew more than I did. I drove down to Burlington and sat in the office of a lawyer my whole life had somehow avoided needing until then, and I told her the whole story. She listened, and then she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Whatever you sign, sign it for your reasons, not theirs." and then she told me how to protect the place for good. We set up what's called an irrevocable trust. I'm not a lawyer, and I won't pretend the details are simple, but the short of it is this. I no longer owned my house and land as a man who could be talked, pressured, or tricked into giving it away. The trust owned it. The trust said in black ink that the property would stay in it as long as Helen or I drew breath, that it could not be sold or transferred out from under us, and that the person who'd step in to manage it, if I couldn't, was not my daughter and not her husband, but my younger sister's boy, my nephew, a steady man who fixes diesel engines for the state and has never once asked me for a dime. I signed it on a Tuesday in March. I drove home in the rain, and then I did the thing that 8 months later, in that dark cellar, was about to save my wife's life. When I built this house, back when I was 31 and stupid and strong, I built more into it than the inspector ever saw. That's a habit of men who work with their hands. You leave yourself a little extra. In the cellar behind the rough stone of the north wall, where the foundation steps down to follow the slope of the hill, I had framed in a recess about the size of a kitchen cabinet and faced it with a section of shelving that swings out if you know to push the bottom corner and lift. For 40 years, I'd kept nothing in there but old paint and a coffee can of silver dollars my own father left me. It was just a place. A man's private place in his own house. After that Tuesday in March, it became something else. I put the original trust documents in there, sealed in a fireproof box. I put a battery lantern in there, the good kind, and I changed those batteries the first of every month, the same as I changed the ones in the smoke detectors. And I put a cheap prepaid cell phone in there, charged, that I topped off twice a year, and that nobody on this earth knew the number of. I'm not a fearful man. I want to be clear about that because I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since. I didn't do it because I was sure my own daughter would lock me in a hole in the ground. I did it because 40 years of building taught me one thing above all others. You don't wait for the storm to find out if the roof holds. So, Thanksgiving Eve, they'd asked to come up the night before to help, my daughter said. Helen was thrilled. She'd been cooking for 2 days. The whole house smelled like sage and butter, and she had the good tablecloth out. And I'll be honest, when they pulled into the driveway and my daughter hugged her mother in the doorway, I felt foolish for the trust and the box and the lantern and all of it. I thought, you cynical old fool, that's your child. Then after supper, my son-in-law set a folder on my kitchen table. He'd had a few glasses of wine, or pretended to. He slid the folder across to me and said it was just some housekeeping. A quitclaim deed, already filled out, already notarized. He'd brought his own notary stamp, which I didn't understand the meaning of until later. All I had to do was sign, he said, and the estate's stuff would finally be squared away, and we could all stop worrying. My daughter wouldn't meet my eyes. She got up and started running water in the sink over dishes that were already clean. I looked at the deed. It transferred my house and land to the two of them for the sum of $1. I set down my fork and I told him, calm as I could, that I wasn't going to sign anything tonight, that I'd had a long day and that we'd talk about it after the holiday. I said it kindly. I even smiled. That's when his face changed. It didn't get loud. It got flat. He said in a reasonable voice that he was tired of being patient, that he and my daughter had carried us emotionally for years, that the house was wasted on two people who couldn't even keep up with the leaves in the gutters. And then he said the thing that told me the night had stopped being a negotiation. He said, "We're not leaving until this is done." Helen started to stand up. She said, "I think everyone should calm down." And my son-in-law took her gently. That's the part I'll never forgive, how gentle he was, by the elbow, and steered her toward the cellar door, and said, "Why don't you two go cool off downstairs?" I could have fought him. I'm 74, but I've got hands like a vise from a lifetime of clamping joints, and for half a second, the old animal in me wanted to. But Helen was right there between us. unsteady on her feet, and I have learned over a long life that there is a kind of strength that looks exactly like doing nothing. I let him walk us down. I heard my own daughter not say a word. I heard the bolt I had installed myself on the outside 40 years ago, so a curious toddler couldn't wander down those steep stairs alone. I'd built the trap. I'd just built it for the wrong child. So there we were. And I looked at my watch, and Helen said my name twice, and I told her to let her eyes settle. The cellar was cold, and getting colder, because the furnace cut off down there to save oil, and the only heat was what crept down from the kitchen. Helen's coat was upstairs on a hook by the door. I gave her mine and made her sit on the bottom step where it was warmest. She was shaking, and not just from the cold. After a stroke, fear does things to a body. Her speech started to slur the way it does when she's overwhelmed, and that frightened me more than the bolt on the door, because I know what that slurring can be the start of. I knelt in front of her in the dark, and I held her face in both my hands. "Listen to me," I said. "I need you to breathe slow. Nothing bad is going to happen to us down here. I promise you that, and you know I don't make promises I can't keep." "They locked us in," she said. "They locked us in, our own. I know what they did. I kept my voice low and even, the voice you use on a spooked dog or a man on a ledge. Now I'm going to show you something I should have told you about a long time ago, and I'm sorry I didn't. Can you hold the rail and stand up for me?" I walked her along the north wall, feeling for the shelving with my fingers the way you'd read in the dark. I found the corner. I pushed it in and lifted, and 40 years of careful joinery did exactly what I'd built it to do. The section swung out without a sound, because I'd oiled those hinges every spring like clockwork. I reached in and turned on the lantern. I will remember Helen's face in that light until the day I die. The wall opened, and a soft, white glow filled the corner of our cold cellar, and my wife looked at the box and the lantern and the phone and then at me, and she said, "What is this? What did you do?" "I got us ready," I said. "Now sit down. We're going to make a phone call, and then I'm going to read you something, and by the time the sun comes up tomorrow, this is going to be over, and it is not going to end the way they think." I dialed 911 first. A man's voice answered, and I told him, quiet and clear, who I was and where I was, and that my daughter and her husband had locked my wife and me in our own cellar against our will, that my wife had a medical condition and the room was cold, and that there were 2 people in the house above me who I no longer trusted. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line. I told him I would, but that the phone wouldn't have much battery, and I wanted to use what it had wisely. He understood. He said a deputy was coming. In a county like ours, coming can mean 20 minutes, and he told me so honestly, and I respected him for it. While we waited, I did the other thing. I opened the fireproof box, and I took out the trust, and I held it up in the lantern light so Helen could see it with her own eyes. And I read her the part that mattered. I read her the part that said the property was held in trust, that it could not be conveyed or transferred out of the trust during our lifetimes, and that any instrument purporting to do so was void. Void. I told her what that word meant in plain English. It meant that the deed sitting on our kitchen table upstairs, the one my son-in-law had brought his own notary stamp to make official, was worth exactly as much as the paper it was printed on. I no longer owned this house in a way that anyone could take from me, which meant no one could take it from me. Not him, not her, not the bank. He no doubt planned to march it straight to. Helen started to cry, but it was a different kind of crying now. She put her hand flat against the trust documents, like she was warming them. "You knew," she said. "All this time, you knew, and you let them come for Thanksgiving." "I didn't know," I said. "I hoped I was wrong. A man can hope he's wrong about his own child and still not be a fool about the locks on his doors." We sat there in the lantern light. the two of us, on the bottom step of a cellar in a house I'd built before our daughter was even born. And I held my wife, while above us our child and the man she married believed they were waiting out two scared old people. I could hear them up there. At one point I heard my daughter say, "What if she gets sick down there?" And I heard him say, "Then they'll be a lot more willing to sign in the morning, won't they?" I want you to understand that I heard that. I heard the father of nobody's children decide that my wife's health was a pressure point. The deputy's headlights swept across the little cellar window 40 minutes later. I've been watching for them. I told the dispatcher I could see the car, and then I let the dying phone go dark. What happened above us, I had to piece together afterward, from the deputy and from the report. They didn't run, which surprised me, though I suppose people like my son-in-law are so used to talking their way out of rooms that it never occurred to him a uniform wouldn't be charmed. He met the deputy at the door with that handshake and that win-win voice and a story about a family misunderstanding and elderly parents who get confused. He actually said that. He said his father-in-law gets confused, but the bolt on the outside of a locked door tells its own story. And when the deputy came down those stairs and found my wife shivering under my coat in a 48-degree cellar with the slur still thick in her voice, the misunderstanding theory did not survive contact with the evidence. They were both arrested that night. I stood in my own kitchen, the deed still sitting on the table, and I watched my son-in-law get walked out to a county car with his hands behind his back. He looked at me on the way past and he said, "Lo, you're going to regret this." And I said, "Son, I've regretted a lot of things in 74 years. This won't be one of them. My daughter was harder. I want to be honest with you because I've listened to people tell stories like this and leave out the part that actually hurts." The deputy asked me gently whether I wanted to keep her out of it, whether maybe she'd just gone along with her husband, whether a father might want to give his only child the benefit of the doubt. And I stood there and I thought about it. I thought about the stool in my shop and the sawdust and the transmission in the Honda. And then I thought about her voice through the floor, asking what if her mother got sick and not unlocking the door. I told the deputy the truth. She was not a bystander. She walked her mother down those stairs alongside her husband. She heard the bolt. She stood in my kitchen for 40 minutes and chose over and over every single minute not to come down and let us out. A grown woman is responsible for what she does with her own two hands and her own 2 feet, and I was not going to insult my daughter by pretending she was a child who didn't know what locking meant. They were both charged. Unlawful restraint. Reckless endangerment because of Helen's condition and the cold. The deed and the notary stamp brought a fraud charge against him on top of it. That is the part I most want the people who hear this to understand, because I know it's the part that's hard. I love my daughter. I love her still, in the helpless way you love a child no matter what they grow into. But love is not the same thing as letting somebody escape the weight of what they did. The kindest thing, the most respectful thing I could do for the woman my daughter had become was to let her be a grown-up who answers for her choices. To do anything less would have been to say she wasn't really a person, just a weather event that happened to me. She was a person. She made a choice. People who make that choice should have to look at it in a courtroom. Helen wanted to forgive her. Of course she did. About a month after, when the worst of the cold had left Helen's bones and the lawyers had started doing what lawyers do, my wife sat at our kitchen table and wrote our daughter a letter. I didn't stop her. I read it after, and it was the gentlest thing, full of grace I'm not sure I could have found. She wrote that she would always be her mother. She wrote that she hoped, when all of this was behind us, there might be a road back. Our daughter never answered it. Her husband's lawyer sent it back with a note saying any contact should go through counsel. So that was that. You can offer somebody a door, but you can't make them walk through it, and I've stopped losing sleep over a person who returns a forgiving letter through a lawyer. He's serving time now. Not a lot, but real time, real walls, Real mornings he doesn't get to choose. She got probation and a record and a marriage that, last I heard, did not survive the strain of two people each blaming the other in separate interrogation rooms. The house and the land are exactly where they've always been, held in trust, safe, ours for as long as Helen and I are here to walk the rooms. After we're gone, my nephew will see that it goes where it's supposed to go, which is to no one in particular and to anyone who needs a roof. Because Helen and I have decided the land will be given to a local outfit that builds homes for folks who've never had one. Our daughter wanted this place so badly she was willing to leave her own mother in the cold for it. It's a small, quiet justice that it'll end up sheltering strangers who'd never dream of locking anybody anywhere. People ask me if I'm bitter. I'm not, mostly. What I am is awake. There's a difference between the two, and it took me most of my life to learn it. I think a lot about why I built that hidden wall 40 years ago, back when my daughter was just a hope Helen and I hadn't met yet. I didn't build it because I expected betrayal. I built it because I was a young man who understood even then that a house is not just walls and that the people you love most are the only ones who will ever be close enough to truly hurt you. You don't lock your doors against strangers. Strangers were never the danger. You build a little extra into the foundation quietly, and you tend it, and you pray you never need it, the same way you keep a fire extinguisher under the sink for a fire you fully intend never to have. These days the house is quiet in a way I've made peace with. In the mornings, I get up before Helen, and I go down and start the coffee, and I stand at the kitchen window and watch the light come up over the 11 acres I cleared by hand half a lifetime ago. The old place settles and ticks and breathes around me the way old houses do, and I think to myself that it has earned its rest, and so have I. Helen's hand is getting stronger. She gardens again. We don't talk about our daughter much, but sometimes one of us will leave a sentence unfinished, and the other one will just nod, because after 50 years, you don't always need the rest of it. I tell this story now because somebody out there is sitting at their own kitchen table, looking at a folder. A relative slid across it, being told it's just housekeeping, being told it's for their own good, being told they're too old to know what's best for them. If that's you, I want you to hear an old carpenter say one thing plainly: a house can be made safe before the storm comes, but only if you do the unglamorous work before you can see a single cloud. Go see somebody who knows the law. Sign things for your reasons, not theirs, and build a little extra into your own foundation. Because the people who love you are the only ones who'll ever get close enough to need locking out, and the saddest, truest thing I know is that most people never find out which kind of child they raised until the bolt slides home. I'd be glad to know where you're listening from tonight. Pour yourself a cup of something warm and tell me your town, and tell me if it had been you on that bottom step in the cold and the dark with the people you raised standing over you. Would you have read them the forgiveness, or would you have just let the lawyers do the talking? I've made my peace with my answer. I'm still not sure it was the right one. But the coffee's hot, the house is warm, the land is ours, and out past the window, the sun is coming up over a place that no one will ever take from us again. What I keep coming back to, in the quiet of these winter mornings, is that nothing about that night was luck. People hear this story and tell me I was lucky. Lucky I built that wall. Lucky I kept the phone. Lucky the deputy came in time. But luck is just a name we give to work. Nobody saw us do. The wall behind the stone didn't appear the night my daughter slid that bolt. I framed it in when I was 31 years old, with no enemy in mind, because I'd already learned that a man should leave a little more in his foundation than the day in front of him is asking for. That habit of thinking past the present moment, of asking quietly what could go wrong long before there's any sign of it, is the one rule I'd carve over every door if I could. The years I spent changing those lantern batteries on the first of every month weren't fear. They were the slow, boring work that makes a person ready, and readiness is never loud until the single night it has to be. But foresight alone wouldn't have saved us. When the bolt slid home and Helen's hands clamped around my arm, the thing that mattered most was that I didn't let the fear move my mouth or my feet. I've buried that hot animal urge 1,000 times across 74 years, and I buried it again on that cold step because I'd learned that the strongest thing a man can do is often to hold still and think. Panic would have cost us the whole night. Steadiness bought it back. And then there was the hardest part, the part I still turn over. When the deputy offered to let my daughter slip free of it, to call her a bystander, every soft and cowardly thing in me wanted to take the door he was holding open. She was my child. But I've come to believe that the truest respect you can give a grown person is to let them answer for what their own hands do. To pretend my daughter was helpless would have been to call her something less than a woman. And I loved her too much for that, even broken-hearted. Mercy that erases the truth isn't mercy, it's just a softer kind of lie. Their greed is what locked that door. But it was my daughter's own choice, made minute by minute while her mother shivered, that decided who she would be on the other side of it. Cause and consequence. I didn't invent that, I only refused to stand between her and it. The house is warm now. Helen's hand grows a little stronger every season, and I've stopped waiting to feel bitter, because bitterness is a debt you keep paying to people who've already taken enough. I'd rather spend my mornings watching the light come up over land no one will ever take, and remembering that a clear mind, an honest heart, and the patience to prepare in the dark are the only inheritance worth leaving anyone.